Well, hello friends. Welcome back to another episode of Reading Michael Jackson. I am your host, Lena, and I am so glad that you're here today for another episode of us discussing Michael's book, Dancing the Dream. By the time you listen to this, we'll be far from Christmas, but while I'm recording it, this is Christmas week. Of course, I've been thinking about Michael and his Christmas messages he sent to fans over the years, his Christmas album with the Jackson 5, Elizabeth Taylor's first Christmas with him, all these things that as fans we're very familiar with. But this week I also saw the Bob Dylan biopic, A Complete Unknown. And I am also a massive fan of Bob Dylan. I was a huge fan of Bob Dylan prior to my discovery, so to speak, of Michael Jackson. And so it was interesting to go see this biopic, especially with, Michael's coming around in less than a year. And it was great. I recommend it. I thought it was a fantastic movie. But anyway, when I came home, I watched and listened to some Bob Dylan stuff, and I rewatched the Bob Dylan's 1965 San Francisco press conference, which most of you, I'm assuming, will not be familiar with this, but it's almost an hour of a press conference with a 24-year-old Bob Dylan and a room full of, 50 or so, maybe more, members of the press, asking him all kinds of questions about his creative process, about the meaning of his work, some really stupid questions also, of course, but things that are mostly about his artistry, very little about his personal life. And I couldn't help but feel a sense of sadness as I watched, because as much as I love and enjoy Bob Dylan's music, I feel a sense of real sorrow that Michael was never given that kind of regard as a serious artist, which, let me be clear, I think there is a massive amount of the public that takes Michael very seriously as an artist, as well as the music industry. So I'm not talking about, Michael's legacy as a whole, but I'm sure we've all seen it, where we see debates online about Michael as an artist. A lot of people want to label him or keep him in the box of entertainer rather than artist, musical genius, visionary, all the things we know about him. I think a lot of people are uncomfortable with the extreme level of talent that he had and the multifaceted nature of his talent. And anyway, my point is, it really breaks my heart that so much of the press's focus on Michael was on his personal life, his appearance, rumors about him. His popularity, I think for some, made it hard to take him seriously as a true artist. No one denies his talent ever, I don't think. But in terms of taking him seriously enough to warrant a 1-hour press conference specifically on his music, I'm not aware of it. If it exists, I'm not aware of it. I'm not aware of him ever being treated with the same sort of dignity as an artist as Bob Dylan was, and still is. And I think that, of course, there's a racial component there. There's a lot of things to consider about why that is, but you can't deny the racial component. But I think it's multifaceted, because I would argue that Prince gets a tremendous amount of respect as an artist as well. So anyway, it frustrates me a lot, and I'm left feeling angry about it. However, it also inspired me to record an episode, because as much as this little podcast project of mine is not going to change the world and will likely not be listened to by very many people at all, I do feel that as fans, part of our job is to shift the narrative back to Michael's work. His humanity, of course, is a huge component of that, but also his work and his talent and his depth, his genius. And I hope, if nothing else, that the focus of this podcast being on his work helps to contribute to that conversation. And hopefully someday we'll see even more written about him and documented about him and explored about him that helps kind of correct the narrative that so many people seem to have that keeps him a little bit too boxed in and not given the respect I think he very clearly deserves as an artist. So with that said, we're going to use that as an opportunity to transition into this next episode and the next piece we will be covering to talk about Dancing the Dream. So settle in, get comfortable, and let's read more of Dancing the Dream. So in the last episode, I read When Babies Smile and discussed it, and I have to admit that by the end of that, I was actually quite emotional. I kind of started crying toward the end. I don't think it's audible to anyone listening, but I got very emotional in talking about the piece. So I really can't reiterate enough how much I enjoy the sort of sustained, real focused energy put on his writing that I've personally not spent enough time with, I'm now realizing. So this week, though, we will be continuing with another essayistic sort of piece that is called But the Heart Said No. Now, I don't have anything underlined in this one. I don't remember much about it, so I'm looking forward to rediscovering it with you today. But the heart said no. They saw the poor living in cardboard shacks, so they knocked the shacks down and built projects. Huge blocks of cement and glass towered over asphalt parking lots. Somehow it wasn't much like home, even home in a shack. "What do you expect?" they asked impatiently. "You're too poor to live like us. Until you could do better for yourselves, you should be grateful, shouldn't you?" The head said yes, but the heart said no. They needed more electricity in the city, so they found a mountain stream to dam. As the waters rose, dead rabbits and deer floated by. Baby birds too young to fly drowned in the nest, while mother birds cried helplessly. "It's not a pretty sight," they said, "but now 1 million people can run their air conditioners all summer. That's more important than one mountain stream, isn't it?" The head said yes, but the heart said no. They saw oppression and terrorism in a far-off land, so they made war against it. Bombs reduced the country to rubble. Its population cowered in fear, and every day more villagers were buried in rough wooden coffins. "You have to be prepared to make sacrifices," they said. "If some innocent bystanders get hurt, isn't that just the price one must pay for peace?" The head said yes, but the heart said no. The years rolled by and they got old. Sitting in their comfortable houses, they took stock. "We've had a good life," they said, "and we did the right thing." Their children looked down and asked why poverty, pollution, and war were still unsolved. "You'll find out soon enough," they replied. "Human beings are weak and selfish. Despite our best efforts, these problems will never really end." The head said yes, but the children looked into their hearts and whispered, "No." I'm beginning to wonder, as I read these pieces, if I'm ever not going to be surprised by them. I find that there's something about the way Michael is writing in this book that is just so unobstructed by pretension. And by that I mean he's talking about huge issues, huge societal problems and cultural issues and kind of the human experience and the flaw of humanity, or the many flaws. of humanity. And yet he's not doing it in this, I don't know, pretentious, worldly sort of way. It's so accessible. It's so reachable and readable to me. And I mean that as a real compliment to the work. There's no need to, flower it up and dress it up, in the sense that he's presenting these as almost individualized conversations. They're representing big issues, and these are the kind of conversations we hear and often participate in, but presented together, 4 little moments like this, I think, speak a lot to the overall issue that he's addressing. So there's a lot of pieces here I want to discuss. Starting with the first paragraph. He talks about the poor living in cardboard shacks and then being knocked down and replaced with projects, and people being critical of those who, are maybe not thrilled with the circumstances of their new situation. Immediately, I thought of neoliberalism policies or neoliberal policies, and the tendency for, I think there to be this view of, we're going to help these people in need by giving them what we think they deserve or what we think is an appropriate fix, rather than going to those people and seeing what they truly need themselves. It just sort of reminds me of that. There's more than that, though. I mean, specifically, I love what he's saying is that, people are in cardboard shacks. And first of all, I love that he calls them cardboard shacks, because it implies that there is actually some structural integrity, which is true, honestly, in a lot of cases. But I love that he says they take them out of what is presumably horrible little cardboard homes and put them in cement buildings that tower over parking lots. So not exactly a pretty pretty picture, but that this idea that help comes with a price, and that you should be grateful for whatever help you're given, even if it's not necessarily what you want or what you would choose. And even if on some level that help that's being given reinforces the notion that you are less than, right? So when the help that's being given keeps you in a place that is unsafe, or in an environment that feels like a prison rather than a home, or, and any of the such, this idea that, still looking down on and seeing as someone as less than. I remember in college getting in an argument with someone in a class. We were talking about, food assistance. And someone was really mad about the thought of someone using, food assistance programs to buy a cake. And I was like, why? Why would you expect a person who's poor to not want a birthday cake or, a cake just for fun? Why are they not deserving of that? I don't know. There was just this weird disconnect there. Anyway, I like that there's this idea that we're going to help you by giving you this thing you didn't ask for. And then if you dare to look around and want something different, or think maybe you deserve more, then you're ungrateful. It also reminds me, I spent a year running a food pantry, and so often people would donate expired food, or they would donate hordes and hordes of canned green beans and canned corn, thinking they're doing something great. But the problem is everyone donated canned green beans and corn, to the point that we didn't have enough room to store it, and yet we had no pasta or rice or proteins of any kind, or even variety in vegetables or canned fruit or anything like that, because people, I know, well-intended people donated the cheapest vegetables they could, and ultimately created a burden for us because we were not able to contain all of the donations. We did not have the physical space for it. but they were not useful donations. I mean, it would not be possible to give away the amount that we were donated before they would expire. Even canned goods, I mean, that's how much we were given. But yet we were lacking in so many things we actually needed because no one actually asked us first what we needed. So it kind of reminds me of that. But specifically, where he goes to saying, you're too poor to live like us. Until you do better for yourself, you should be grateful. The head said yes, but the heart said no. Just this first stanza, we're reminded of, oh yeah, we all kind of do know the truth. In our heart, we actually do know the difference, So we get to the second part about the electricity needed in the city and siphoning it, the electricity from the mountains and the dam. How we justify the animals dying and the environment suffering so that people can be more comfortable. And again, pointing out the focus on the short term rather than the long term. I understand. I mean, the air conditioning thing is difficult because there's climates that are very difficult to live in and are dangerous to live in without air conditioning. And I understand that it's complicated, but I think his point resonates and it makes sense. The third section about oppression and terrorism in a far-off land and the justification. You have to be prepared to make sacrifices. If some innocent bystanders get hurt, isn't that just the price one must pay for peace? I mean, what can be said about that? I feel the only people who say those words are people unaffected by the actual violence, right? I mean, we don't see ourselves as disposable bystanders, do we? So certainly we shouldn't see the people directly around us as those things, or even the people across a country or across a land or an ocean, but it is justified. And I would say, as an American specifically, and I might make some people unhappy when I say this, but I do think that we're fed this justification quite a lot about the workings of the world. And then finally, he ends with, the years rolled by and they got old, sitting in the comfortable houses they took stock. And then they pat themselves in the back. We had a good life and we did the right thing, but it's not possible to change or fix the world. And reinforcing that idea. And I get it because, I get it. As I get older, I hear fewer and fewer people talking about the good in the world. I hear more and more people leaning into negativity about the world as a whole, as well as each other, as well as other people. More and more people kind of sending the bad energy into the world that they claim to be frustrated about receiving from others. It's just ironic, It's ironic, but I think that in order to justify your own inaction, you have to believe that other people are the problem. It's ironic, I think, but it's true. And it's a trap we all fall into, or many of us do. I certainly can't pretend that I don't. I mean, I often do. I try not to, but of course, I'm a human being. Of course I do. But I do think there's something kind of depressing about the acceptance so many of us have. Despite our best efforts, these problems will never really end. And that could be true. That could be true. But I have often wondered about it. Earlier today, my husband and I were discussing mind reading. And he said, I'm so glad I can't read minds because I think it would be hard to live in the world and not be really depressed about it. And I said, but what if when we read people's minds, we realized how beautiful they were and how much more beauty there is in the world and how much more goodness there is in the world? Because people think a lot of unexpressed thoughts that are good also. It's not all bad. People think a lot of good things. I mean, I don't even mean necessarily like kindness. I just mean joyful things. People think nonstop all day long. I mean, how much of that is negative every day? Plus, the negative we would understand more because we'd have context. Now, don't get me wrong. I don't want to mind read at all. I would never want such a gift or curse, really. But my point still stands. I think Michael's point, I don't think Michael shies away from saying people are selfish. I think this whole poem is about selfishness and self-delusion and evading accountability. But I also think this poem is about how deep inside we know the difference between these things, and we know that they're not right. And I think he ends here with, like, children are asking these questions, but in their hearts they know it's not true. I think he ends there because there's this reminder always that the future will always contain the desire for a better world. Children especially will always contain that desire. And we may lose it in adulthood, but it's renewed with every generation. Hopefully, it is renewed with every generation. I do worry that it will be less so with how negative the world is now. I mean, I think in reality it's always been negative, but we're exposed to so much more negativity every day because of our connectedness, which fosters a lot of disconnect, it seems. Nevertheless, my point is, because this is already much longer than I intended, but I think with a lot of Michael's work that I personally find so effective is that, yes, he is positive and bright and beautiful about life and the world. He's also extremely realistic in that he knows that adults, especially the people who run the world, he knows that we have selfish tendencies, that we don't like to be held accountable, that we like to point the finger. He knows that. He's not in some ignorant bliss about the world, from what I can tell. He's a positive person, and he believes in the possibilities of the future, that anything is possible, that everything is worth saving, and it's always a possibility to save things. But he also understands the reality of how people are, which is why I think he looks to children, the next generation, the constant renewal of humanity, as a continual opportunity to grow and be better. Needless to say, I really enjoyed this piece, and I talked quite a bit on this one. I didn't intend to, but it struck a lot of chords for me, I guess. So once again, I want to thank you for joining me, for listening to this piece and my own personal interpretation of it. You're, of course, always welcome to your own and to disagree. This is just my view on the words that he shares with us. Until next time, then, I look forward to speaking with you again and sharing a bit more of Dancing the Dream.